On that note, it's my delight to introduce to our members of the audience our Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Jayanti S. Ravi, Secretary and Commissioner of Rural Development, Government of Gujarat. She has worked as a Commissioner of Schools, Commissioner for Higher and Technical Education, the Chairperson of the State Board of Secondary Education, and Founder CEO of Knowledge Consortium of Gujarat and the Labour Commissioner. She's a visiting faculty of the Harvard University and has been deeply involved in conceptualizing key labour reforms in the state of Gujarat for a new labour paradigm based on trust, responsibility and growth. Ladies and gentlemen, she has a master's degree in nuclear physics and a PhD in technology enhanced education from the MS University, Baroda. So with a warm round of applause, please help me welcome our Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Jayanti S. Ravi.
Good morning, everybody. I'm indeed very happy to be here with all of you this morning. And I'd like to congratulate the organizers for really thinking of bringing all of us from different areas, different sectors, different stakeholders to actually be here, share some of our thoughts. And if you look at this title, and I think when we look at Financial Inclusion Summit, which is actually written out here, there's something that stands out, isn't it? There's U and S in blue. So financial inclusion, I think the emphasis is on us. The fact that there are many Indias, there are many of us, and how is it that we can all come together? How is it that we can collectively choreograph and be a part of the history that we're all collectively trying to make, write, and share maybe some generations later, some years later, to say that this was a country, like Muhammad Yunus has very famously said, that we did have poverty and deprivation, and it would be something that younger people then may find unbelievable. They may not be able to believe it. But coming back to the definition, which Sandhya has very clearly said, it refers to the universal access by households and enterprises to an appropriate range of financial services at a reasonable cost by a range of responsible and sustainable financial institutions. So I think if that is the definition of what we're going to be deliberating on today, and we look at the word US, us, at the core of it, I think a lot of emphasis also ought to be given to the demand side. We often find that all these schemes, all these innovations, interventions that are being thought of, designed and implemented come from the supply side. And here, there has been a tendency to carry out what I like to call rice cultivation in a way. And I want to draw a difference here between rice cultivation and rose cultivation. A lot of times, there are schemes that are rolled out and there are approaches, the intentions are very good, but we do try to do something for a mass scale without quite customizing, without really looking at the granularity of the people for whom it is actually intended. And something that would be of great help to all of us in actually making this goal a possibility, a certainty that can happen in a very, very defined and tangible period of time is something known as the socio-economic caste census. We've all heard of the bottom of the pyramid. This is a phrase that Professor C.K. Prahalad had so famously in his book, and it became very popular, and he talked about how there's a lot of poverty at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, when you actually look at some of the deprivation data, the socio-economic caste census, which is based on a survey that was actually carried out across the country around the year 2012, because it in many states spanned about 3 full years. So it happened, we can keep 2012 as possibly a median year when all this was happening. But when we actually look at this and talk of covering the uncovered, you find that there's a treasure, a very rich set of data that we get from here. It has actually categorized the people that we have, especially in rural areas and urban areas. But since I am working as the Commissioner and Secretary for Rural Development, I want to share some of my insights from there. You do have a category of people who are automatically excluded from the groups that are deprived. There are sets of people who are automatically included. And then there are also a very interesting, people have been tagged based on the number of deprivations that they have. Those with 1 deprivation, those households with 2 deprivations, and so on till 7 deprivations. And very interestingly, while intuitively we tend to look at poverty being depicted as a pyramid, and the bottom of the pyramid or the base of the pyramid actually showing or representing the poor, when we did some analysis and went into the bottom of the pyramid, those that are the really severely deprived set of households, those who have all the 7 deprivations actually being inflicted on them in a way, or those that suffer from all the 7 deprivations, we found an interesting picture emerge. It's actually an inverted pyramid. So the bottom of a pyramid is an inverted pyramid, and therefore, if instead of doing this general rice cultivation, if we were to actually go and pick up something like cherry picking, if these households which have been mapped, we exactly know which are the gram panchayats, which are the villages, which are the specific households which suffer from these deprivations, D1 to D7. D1 means exactly 1 deprivation, but the worst, as I said, those that are the worst, I would use the word, those that bear the brunt of it are those with exactly 7 deprivations, all the deprivations. So it's actually an inverted pyramid. So we could start with the D7, the most deprived, those that really need to be brought into the gamut or into the financial inclusion space. And then if we were to move upwards, up till D4, D5, D6, and D7, I think we would be able to address this problem in a very, very substantial manner. And how do we go about this? Who are these? Where are these? I think we did have an idea. Now, having done that, we all operate with choices, don't we? I mean, whether it's a matter of choosing what to have to eat, maybe what is the beverage we want to have, or the clothes that we want to have. We work in a paradigm of abundance, a paradigm of choices. And similarly, if we can take this dialogue, this discourse, to the place where the tire touches the ground, the last mile, or as we often call it, the first mile, and actually have a process of widely disseminating, creating an awareness, bringing about a great deal of information, also social behavior change processes to fortify people with all this information and help them then make choices, but with a focus. So it would be more like actually drip irrigation rather than just throwing water and letting it go wherever, letting it go the drain. But if we could actually go to these households, engage with them, and have an exercise, something like an intensive participatory planning exercise, which is currently being undertaken incidentally by the Ministry of Rural Development as well. But if it could be done in letter and spirit at every touch point at the rural level, we can actually have some insights into what is it that these people need, what are their actual problems, how can we make the us in the financial inclusion, which includes not just people like us, but all of us, all of those who are citizens of this country, come into the gamut of financial inclusion. Here, we also can take help of the legitimately elected local self-government institution heads, the sarpanchas or the pradhans as they are called. And here, if there is a way of actually involving them as well, the elected representatives, including the women representatives, because gender, again, is a very important factor. You find that when you talk of financial inclusion, us has several dimensions. It's not just about, for example, this room as well. One doesn't see too many women here. I don't know if this is, maybe some of us are in some way compensating for the absence of many more. But at the village level, the situation is not very different either. You find that in most of the decision-making places, fora, it's mainly dominated by men. And it's not about an aggressive way of completely turning the tables, but then I think if we can have a more equitable system of involving them in decision-making too, it would bring about, I think, a big qualitative and a quantitative change. And this is, again, leads me to another point. When we often look at a lot of these schemes, if we were to even look at some of the immediate schemes, like we have the Pradhan Mantri, Jan Dhan Yojana, etc., which are all, I think, the right first steps to ensure that we move towards a paradigm of proper financial inclusion, you find that while quantity is certainly of essence, because when you talk of financial inclusion, it's about covering the uncovered. You really have to make sure there's progress in leaps and bounds to cover the uncovered, and therefore there is an issue of numbers, quantity, massification. And often this is perceived to be, and actually often turns out to be orthogonal to the dimension of quality, because quantity and quality often don't quite go hand in hand. But that is where an approach like this, where if we can actually leverage on some of these very, very interesting treasure troves of data, like the socio-economic caste census, where we can cherry pick and ensure that those that are most malnourished, so to say, terribly deprived, if those families deprived from the economic point of view, who are not financially in the mainstream at all, if they can be picked up and fortified, it would make a world of difference. And having looked at many villages across Gujarat and even other states of India, the other point that also comes to my mind is, this is again the scenario that we see out there is not a very homogeneous scenario. It's not as if every village is identical, the problems are similar. There's a great deal of diversity. There's a great deal of heterogeneity, both in terms of the issues, concerns, problems, contexts, and also in terms of leadership quotients. You do find some of these villages where the elected heads of the village are able to take initiative, they have a lot of ideas, and they have actually demonstrated it. And on the other hand, there are those that are still struggling with basic issues. And here, one of the things that we could do, which we are trying out in a small way in Gujarat now, is to identify what are known as star sarpanches, those heads of villages who have shown all these requisite qualities and demonstrated it as well in terms of leadership for various dimensions of human development, including financial inclusion, because that's a very key parameter dimension to ensure that people really develop as a group. And then, so we could have a cascading system where we also look at another set of sarpanches, maybe who are also now referred to as iconic sarpanches. So you have a sort of hierarchy, and you use them also to train, because peer learning works much better than something which is top-down and something which is told at them rather than something which emerges with them and by them. So it's important that we involve the participation of the local stakeholders there, these households with all these deprivations, if we were to attack the most vulnerable, the most needy to begin with. But this does not mean for a minute that we leave out the rest. It would certainly be, I think it should be an approach where we keep all these options available for everybody, but then a special focused attention could be made for these categories. And here, another very important tool, and the tool itself could also yield some wonderful results, is this whole movement of self-help groups. Microfinance, as we say, through the institution of women self-help groups. This is something that has taken off very well in most states of the country, in many parts of the country. And of course, it involves a lot of investment in terms of time, training, giving them exposure visits and so on. But we've seen miracles happening where women as a group have actually come together and been able to take decisions and start rolling out various things. So this again, I think, would play a very important role if we can get the microfinance through self-help groups, if we can do that. And here, there are several related issues as well. When we look at financial inclusion, there are several other aspects also that come in. It's not just about the ability to soak up all of this. You need better health, you need education, you need all those basics as well, which is what then keeps them in a position. It sort of gives them the ability to be able to absorb all of this. And therefore, to ensure the self-help groups could play a very important role in ensuring this kind of a holistic development of the village. And if we could have financial inclusion, this is something that we started working in Gujarat when I was in the education department, actually incorporate financial inclusion in the curriculum at all levels. Just as we have, these are all basic life skills, I would say. If we can, just as we have things on hygiene, health, civics, civic sense, so on. So why not financial inclusion? If that can be made a part of because that's a very relevant set of competencies, skills, knowledge that any young person passing out of schools, colleges in rural areas ought to have. And here again, another thought that comes to my mind when we talk of all of this is, just as we talk of ease of doing business, I'm very happy to share with you that very recently, in the ease of doing business rating that was done for different states of India, Gujarat got the first position. So just as you talk of the ease of doing business, which is absolutely important, I'm not for a minute giving any less importance to it, but isn't it equally important to have an ease of accessing rural services, schemes, including finances and so on? So can we work on a similar rubric to see the ease of accessing rural schemes, services, including financial services? And if we can put this in place and see how is it that we can facilitate, how can we bring in transparency, how can we fortify those who have various disadvantages, starting with language, accessibility. Most of the time, the most critical, the 7 categories of people that we just spoke of, people who have all kinds of deprivation, they find it very difficult to even access any of these. So these are some of the thoughts that came to my mind. And when we also refer to financial inclusion, another important dimension of this whole thing would also be to have some kind of a rubric which allows us to audit, assess, and do an accreditation of the situation as it is found at every village. So can we have a AAA kind of mechanism to be able to access all these services that we're talking of? And here again, choices are of essence. We've come to a situation today where whether it is students who want to have choices in terms of studying what they want, and I think here too, if we can give a range of products, they could be simple, no-frill products, but some choices there, because you cannot have a one-size-fits-all, even within one village, one geography for 2 people, and therefore across a state, across a country, this certainly doesn't make it tenable. So on this line, I think some of the points that very clearly emerge today as we are deliberating on this for all of us to look at is that if we look at some of the accomplishments that all of us as a country we've really had here, if we can focus a lot on this, just as we focused a lot on the ease of doing business, this whole concept of ease of accessing rural services, if that is something that can be given a lot of importance. And similarly, if we can fortify people with more and more choices, because I think it is these choices of various financial products, services that will make it better. It could be no frills choices, but nevertheless choices for people to choose from. We must respect it. And on that note, I also want to share that Gujarat has done reasonably well in many of these schemes, including the Mudra, in terms of both disbursement, sanction. I have numbers here. I don't want to frighten you or scare you with suffocating details of too many numbers. But you realize that all this is possible when you have proper implementation structures at the district level and finally at the place where the tire touches the ground at the village level. And that is where these self-help groups, the local self-government institutions, if they're healthy and we leverage all of them to be able to take these ideas forward, it would make a lot of difference. And on this note, I'm delighted that you're all here today to deliberate on financial inclusion. And I do hope that we carry with us a lot of these insights, ideas, and more than just at the plane of the intellectual plane of discussing, trying to debate on various possibilities. I'll be very happy if at the end of this, if some of you can volunteer and actually take up a few villages, a few locations, it could be anywhere. We'd like to also welcome you to Gujarat. If there could be a few villages, a few pockets where we can actually demonstrate. And if we just started with the socio-economic caste census that I just spoke about, and if we could take up all these deprivations, and can we work on ensuring that none of these deprivations actually it's like no child left behind. Can we work on it since all the mapping is done? Till now, we've often looked at some of these problems in a very nebulous way. There was no clarity as to where exactly. We couldn't pinpoint it with a cross mark and say that this is the family, this is the household where there is a problem. So things were rather diffused. You knew that there was poverty, you knew there were problems, it was multidimensional, but it was a more diffused kind of thing which had not been mapped with the kind of precision that we now have. So now that we have it, is there a way of having a concerted way? And the smallest unit here would be a Gram Panchayat. And if we look at a city, urban area, it could be a ward. And if we disaggregate the problem looks a little daunting if we look at it in its totality. But it's like the small story. If you were to really cut it up, I'm sure a lot of us are vegetarians here, and I'm not really for eating an elephant. But there is an African proverb that you cannot probably have all of it at one go. But if you can actually break up the problem into smaller bits, geographical pieces, analyze it, if you really know which are the most vulnerable, those with all these problems, the disparities, and if we can start addressing them, I'm sure the contextual situation is very different. So you cannot have the same solution in village A, which would be valid for a village B right there in the same district, same tehsil. Forget the same solution across the country. But having said that, what is really needed is a multidisciplinary team which has stakeholders from the banks, it has stakeholders from the government, educational institutions coming together. And if we can put together a simple plan for a few of these villages, maybe on a pilot basis, and see how is it that we can work towards ensuring that everybody, there's no one left behind in those categories, as we just mentioned, under the different disparities that we see. So on that note, I'm extremely happy that you're all here to deliberate on something as important as this today morning. I'm looking forward also to getting a lot of insights from all of you. We'd like to welcome all of you to join, because we can kiss the idea goodbye that any of these problems that our country faces are problems that can be solved individually by stakeholders from any one segment. It certainly requires all of us to collectively put our heads together, think through, and the diversity that our country offers also gets reflected in the challenges and the problems that our country offers. And we could also say that of the opportunities, the possibilities that the country offers. So is there a way that we can, the deliberations today, I think, are absolutely welcome. I'm delighted that the Economic Times has actually put together this forum today and in a way kickstart this deliberation process. But I think it's imperative that from the plane of ideation and thinking, instead of just stopping it there, even if a few small acts on the ground could emerge from all the deliberations that we have here today, it would be personally a very, very satisfying experience. And I'd like to welcome those of you who are interested to our state as well. You could, as a part of a collective effort, maybe a portion of your CSR as well, a portion of your own commitment to working at the village level, if you could take up a few villages and see how we can actually, in a very systematic, sensitive manner, plan and ensure that all these people with deprivation are actually pulled up with a basket of choices. We must respect human choices and fortify people, because I think people know what is right for them if they're given the right inputs and education. On that note, I'd like to once again thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Namaste.